All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Sophia Prater. I'm the host of the OOUX Happy Hour, the OOUX Podcast. Consider myself the chief evangelist for object-oriented UX and love having content people, information architects, data people here to talk about data-y stuff and content-y stuff that folks that like OOUX tend to really like. So we've got Scott Kubie here today. Author of Writing for Designers, which is a great book. Not really what we're going to be talking about today. Where's my copy? Here it is. Oh my God, goodness, it is so marked up. This is like, just if you like writing in general. I mean, this is great for if you're a designer and you write. Really, really enjoyed the book. And Scott was also on the podcast recently talking about content ecosystem mapping. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. I am going to be the guinea pig today. So you'll get like this really maybe weird, transparent look into the content ecosystem of OOUX and kind of the empire that we're trying to build here to get OOUX out to the masses. So it should be pretty interesting. So, Scott, we didn't have too much time before because we were dealing with your accessibility settings and stuff like that. How long is your presentation? How long do you need?
So this is more demonstration than presentation.
Yeah.
So we will get out of it as much as you want to put into it. There's a 20-minute version. There's a 40-minute version.
Okay.
People want to stay with me all day. I got nothing going on. We can keep going.
I find that hard to believe. All right, so we'll do a quick breakout room, just so some of y'all can meet each other. We like to do this at the beginning, and then if we have time at the end, we'll do another one, but try to just simulate this actually being a meetup where at the beginning, before the meetup starts, you tend to talk to people a little bit. So we're gonna just do like 5 minutes. It's gonna feel too short, I promise. All right, wonderful. Welcome back. Okay, so I think I've already introduced Scott. Scott, where are you? Where are you? There. Okay, you're here. Wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and I still don't see you. Hello, Scott. Scott, where are you? Want to come
up? If I wave.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Can I spotlight you? Spotlight.
I can probably do it for myself. Oh yeah, there we go. All
You're spotlighted. All right.
Hey,
what are we doing here? Let's do this thing.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks for being here. We're talking about content ecosystem mapping. I'm sure some of you have listened to the podcast, so I won't give a super big summary because I have found from experience that it's easier to show people what this thing is and how it works. But at a very high level, my background is content strategy. Especially like in an agency context where I'm coming in doing kind of management level consulting with a big team of people, helping them make sense of their content universe generally so that they can go do something else. So a lot of the inflection points for my work is like, we need to retire our old content management system. That was running 3 websites. Now we need to do a consolidation. Maybe a company has been through an acquisition or they're going through a rebrand. So it's causing them to just sort of like reevaluate their whole footprint. Whatever it might be, I'm generally having to do some level of sense making and helping people like see the big picture so that they can make big picture decisions, which is hard to do if you're in the weeds all day, like running an editorial team and, just responding to content requests and putting out content fires and so on. So I'm going to share my screen here. And actually, I guess just really for kind of an overview, Sophia very graciously shared kind of an object map and a list of what I tend to talk about as concepts in her respective universes of OOUX and her Rewired UX consultancy. We'll get into that. And we're going to be using that as an example to sort of demonstrate how this technique works. So I will share my screen. Thusly, momentary recursion. And hopefully everyone is seeing my screen okay. So there's a ton of stuff on this canvas. This is how I tend to work, just like how the sausage gets made, is I build up a body of knowledge in a Miro board and just keep adding and adding things to it. So my idea here is not to walk through all this stuff with you, but I do want to do like a couple of quick highlights. I love this one. If anyone listens to 99PI podcast, they did a great episode about this physical model of the Mississippi River basin for flood modeling. So this is before anyone's got computers. This is trying to understand a huge system. And even with supercomputers today, like modeling hydrology and how water flows is really complicated. But they were able to sort of build a scale model. This is like a huge thing in this like aircraft hangar, and having this model let people get in and play with it and see where there might be weak points, what they want to change, what they want to consolidate, and so on. Similarly, these are two of my favorite designers in the world, Charles and Ray Eames. This is them with a scale model that they built of the Mathematica exhibit that they were designing, this big museum installation. And they would similarly do actual physical modeling of the things that they were building so that they could see it from different perspectives. You can see Charles down here taking a photograph, imagining how people might move through this space. So this kind of modeling to make sense of big complex things is what I've done a lot of in my career. There's a lot of examples here. A super simple content ecosystem map, just to give you an example. This is ages ago in my career journey. We're in 2013. And I was having a complicated conversation as just an in-house content strategist because everyone was talking about release notes and how we needed to get release notes online for these releases for this new cloud product. So there's a production release, so the developers ship some new code. Those developers create release notes, which is in this format, which I would call a content type. This notebook was just part of the technology stack we had. And I'm illustrating here that this is created by the development team. What people were asking me to do was they kept saying, well, you need to do the release notes. I'm saying, well, no, the developers do the release notes. Why would I write them? It sounds like what you're actually asking me for is a new thing that we don't have a word for. So that thing we're going to call an update message. So I will summarize these production releases. An update message, I'm going to write them. I don't usually use individuals now. I use roles, always evolving. And that update message is going to get adapted into all of these different things that get sent to these various places. So I just made this to like sort of like this was like a tactical application of an ecosystem map to say, is this what you're asking me to do? Or am I like completely misunderstanding here? Is there something else that needs to get produced or some other team we need to loop in? I've done a lot of versions of them. You can do them on a whiteboard. A lot of these are just here for me to refer back to them. But where this comes from, and I think this will be interesting to the OOUX crowd, is what I have in the technique that I use, content ecosystem mapping. That's just really a made-up term that I use to describe concept maps in the context of being a content strategist. That was a lot of C words. But concept mapping is not even a design technique per se. The formal version of them that I use here come from education. So there was a couple of fellows back in, I think they started in on this work in the 50s, were proposing that that concept maps get used more in education and to assess student knowledge. So rather than giving someone a quiz and asking them, when did the War of 1812 start, we would sort of ask them to describe, like, what was that conflict, who were the players, and how do they all relate to each other? So this format, this version here of concept mapping, concept modeling, is exactly what I do with my content ecosystem maps. So this I'm using as a shortcut so that we can get into the, as I've dubbed it, the Sophia Prater cinematic universe down here. But I shared this with a meetup group earlier this week just to show you kind of how this comes together. So there's this concept, content ecosystem mapping, that produces content ecosystem maps. It's useful for me to draw these distinctions. I'm always doing lines between things, and I'm always giving those connections a label. This is the really important part. I've worked with a lot of teams that do what I would describe as visual inventories of all the things in their system, but they don't go the additional step of describing the relationship between those objects. And I do this as a form of, I was filling this in earlier. So content ecosystem mapping is I guess I can just say is primarily even, I would say, is primarily a sense-making activity. So the act of making these things is sense making. It's helping you and the people you work with. It's helping you and the consulting team, whomever it might be, make more sense of your content universe. To what end depends on your goals and what you're trying to accomplish. So all that said, and folks, feel free to jump in at any time with questions. But what I want to do here, so Sophia put this together. You might have seen her tweet this out earlier if you were following the Twitter account. A lot of the stuff, these are kind of the starter categories that I give folks when I do. I've just started to borrow this term from OOUX because I think it's great, which is noun foraging. So collecting together the nouns that I'm looking for are products, brands, content types, people and teams, your technology and platforms, channels, and then very often things like rules, guidelines, and like business objectives and customer objectives I will often put on the map as well. So I've taken this fantastic start, put them into bubbles. This is a tactical thing. I always do round shapes. Bubbles are important. They're round on purpose. If things are square, or they're diamonds, it implies directionality. It implies four corners or a limited number of connections, whereas one idea might connect to a whole lot of stuff. So we're just going to jump in here, and I loved this, Sophia, if we could. So very often there's a focus question for the maps, which just helps us decide, like, how do we set the scope for this thing. So untangle content on OOUX.com versus rewiredux.com. So when I am consulting, if I see a question like that, and we've already got them on the list, but I want to come in here. So we have OOUX.com is a thing. We have rewiredux.com. These are websites? Question mark?
Yes.
Okay. So that may or may not be a useful connection or relationship, but we'll start there. OOUX.com, I imagine, and I know, but I'm playing pretend here. So that's associated with OOUX.
Right.
Which is a what?
A crusade, a movement,
okay.
A movement. Feel free in the chat to help me out here. UX framework. Is it a UX framework? Is it part of a UX framework? OOUX is a philosophy.
Okay.
It's a philosophy. Yeah. And then Orca is the framework.
Okay.
Orca is the how.
Okay. So Orca is a UX framework, you might say. Okay. Oops. So Orca is... Why are my labels so small? Get bigger.
We've got some good stuff in the chat. We've got religion, discipline for OOUX. OOUX could be a discipline. Like, yeah, it's like a way of thinking about UX and digital. So I think philosophy is good. Philosophy feels right enough.
Okay. Can we, and this is me sort of illustrating the facilitation technique. So like it's very helpful to guide people through this. You want to listen, you want to reflect, but you also want to shape. So I'm actually doing a lot of shaping. Content ecosystem maps are rhetorical. You're trying to get people to a new level of understanding. So if I may, Sophia, philosophy, like utilitarianism is a philosophy. So we probably don't mean OOUX as a philosophy that way. Is it a design philosophy? Is it something like that work for you?
Yeah, and even more specifically, I would say it's a digital design philosophy.
Okay.
I don't think you would use this for, people of OOUX. We've done some things on OOUX in your life before. So it's almost like, but that's more of using the Orca process. Ooh, see, I'm being a terrible client right now. But I guess this is right, that people will be like, I don't know. Yeah, digital design philosophy sounds okay.
So sometimes what I do when I hear that is I'll get in here to the connections and add a little qualifier like that. So OOUX is best understood as a digital design philosophy. Orca is a UX framework. And UX frameworks, let's say, I'm just going to cheat here and fill in one. Oops. Z, Command Z. So tool recommendations is a question I get a lot. I am fastest in OmniGraffle, but in this digital land, Miro is what I tend to use most now.
And Orca, I would even say Orca it's more of a process, a tool / process, a framework for not even UX. Because I think it's a framework for understanding. Okay. And it could be anything. It could be a framework for understanding your life and your own goals. It could be a framework for developers to understand. It doesn't necessarily have to be for UX.
Great.
For understanding and synthesis, a framework for understanding and synthesis.
Understanding and synthesis. So this is fantastic. So we're in the brand weeds, we're in the conceptual weeds. We're for the time we have today. We'll see how far we get into systems and stuff. But sometimes what I do when I'm doing this is, and I don't necessarily make the client or make myself map them in right away, but you just introduced these concepts, understanding and synthesis, that may end up being useful, right? Because I can see. Understanding and synthesis, like design thinking generally helps us achieve understanding and synthesis. Content ecosystem mapping is a tool that could help us achieve understanding and synthesis, which isn't to say that that's not the right answer. It very much could be, but I think it's when you start to extract these things, then you get some more of that in there.
Cool. Okay. Scott, we got a question from Jerry. So can you explain, like, what point in the project do you do this kind of mapping? Like, what should happen before or after?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. There's two answers. One is this is a very good thing to go through before you make a big decision that is very hard to take back. So if you are thinking about consolidating two websites into one website, if you are thinking about introducing a new feature or plan level that changes the fabric of reality. I talk about reality and mapping reality a lot. So if the texture of your reality is about to change, this is a really, really good time to do it. That said, I think anytime, like when you're onboarding, my friend Michael Metz just used a version of this technique and had a popular tweet about it where he was sort of using this kind of reflective concept mapping during his own onboarding in a new job and used it to reflect his learnings from the people he was talking to. And so sort of like doing it in the way that a surveyor or explorer would, to say, all right, I'm going through new territory here. I want to make a map of that territory as I go. The nice thing about drawing a picture of it is that people can more quickly respond and tell you if you're getting closer or further away from your map of reality matching their map of reality, which is not something that we do enough in design. Great question. Okay, so OOUX is best understood as a digital design philosophy. We also have Rewired UX. How is it most talkable for you?
I would say this is a marketing site for our design agency.
Okay, so Rewired is a design agency. Okay, and so Rewired is a design agency, and we have this idea of a marketing website. And this is where it starts to get interesting. It might not for this particular example. Who added a bend? I didn't want to do that. All right. So Rewired, we're saying, is a marketing website. Rewired, where's the closest relationship here? Do you think about between Rewired UX and Rewired.com? Does Rewired UX market Rewired? Does it represent it? Does it showcase it? What is it kind of doing for the thing that is Rewired, this agency?
Right. I think it would be, and this is how I think about websites in general, it would be a reflection of it.
Okay, so Rewired reflects, or RewiredUX.com reflects Rewired.
Yes.
We can also understand that RewiredUX.com is a marketing website. Is OOUX.com a marketing website?
It's more than yes. I mean, but it's more of an information website.
Okay.
And then through that information, hopefully people like it. I mean, you can buy stuff. You can buy the master class on it. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there is a function of, and I know we have this in the list elsewhere, but masterclass. We have, let's see. So talk about let's get customers on the maps a little bit. So very high level here. Do we have any language around that yet? A little bit. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do some rapid noun foraging. What are some of the people terms, whether they're personas, segments, buying life cycle? What are some of the words in your universe around that?
Okay. Give me a moment and I will bring, because I have this in Airtable. A new version of Airtable is available. So yes, I have those kind of like, are you talking about like customer segments? Like who are the folks that we're trying to, okay. So that would be under,
I'm going to hit a question from chat here while you're looking at that.
Yes, do that.
So how do you decide what is a concept versus a relationship? For example, Orca is a framework for OOUX, Orca to framework. So you're asking the right question. I never have a satisfying answer. This is a little bit of a loosey-goosey technique, and you have to ride the wave of ambiguity. And what I mean by that is, what needs to be a concept, what needs to be mapped as a relationship, the direction that relationship goes from left to right or right to left. I keep coming back to what is most true. What is most true? So if we want to if it's useful, because we want to turn them, so just as a for instance, let's say that Sophia was looking for some new branding and wanted to inspire an editorial calendar with some themes. So if we wanted to elevate understanding and synthesis to themes in an editorial calendar, in tweets, in material that you're producing, then I would say it's more useful to extract, a combined concept like this out into discrete concepts, because now we can hang more things off of them. And maybe it's easier to talk about understanding in meetups, and maybe it's easier to talk about synthesis in tweets or whatever. That's not a great example, but if you kind of follow the sentiment there, it's what you do is you're sort of mapping what's true and also what's useful, because eventually, what's the challenge of this technique, and there's an example here, you can get all the way out to mapping like the nature of the universe, right? And I like to show this example sometimes. This is one of the concept mapping examples. Your map doesn't have to have everything in it. This is a really, really, really simplified version of the universe. How many concepts are there in the universe? However many we can think of, right? Trillions. Every thought anyone's ever had. Dogs, David Bowie, bananas, pens, OOUX. These are all concepts in the universe. But you can describe it with a very simple model of matter and energy and the relationships between those things. So very often what I'm doing, and what we won't have time to get through in an hour, this is usually at least a few half-day sessions. Sometimes I'll do this for, over 6 weeks or so with a client, is I make it like this. It's big and it's messy, and we get dozens or even 100 concepts. And then we start to say, okay. What are we really trying to say? What are we really trying to say? What is actually the isness, the truth, the nugget of our world? And how do we represent that in a map that makes sense to other people? Okay. So little aside there, some of those customer segments.
Yes. Okay. So they're different for OOUX.com and for Rewired. So, but there's quite a few like audiences that I am trying to serve. So one is going to be those people that are OOUX curious, that are struggling with a lot of complexity, and they want help upping their game to being able to more elegantly tackle that complexity. So that can really be anybody from entry level all the way up to director level. But those that are curious about OOUX and think that it might be a solution for them to tackle complexity.
Okay. So here, let's hit this one really fast, because I think this is illustrative of the technique. So we have this idea of OOUX segments, and I'm going to pull these over here somewhere. Well, actually, could you give me just one more segment for OOUX? So the OOUX curious, and then what's another one?
So the other ones would be manager level, people who want their team trained. So those that like, I want this for myself versus like my team needs this. They could be a UX director level or even like a C-suite person.
Okay, great. So OOUX.com, does this website inform, market to, whatever, all of your OOUX segments? Is that your intention and strategic priority? Okay.
Yes.
So, and actually, just since we weren't sure if it was these shortcuts are killing me. Okay. Since we weren't sure if it was marketing or informational, I'm going to skip over that. And we're just going to say like supports or reaches or has stuff for. You know, it's always good to get more specific as you go. But so OOUX.com has stuff for all OOUX segments, which includes the OOUX curious and managers. That's a good thing to know and articulate in an organization, because that's not always true. You may find that there's segment 3 and segment 4.
So current OUXers, certified strategists.
Okay.
Or those that are already using it and they just want to know what's new, experts.
Okay. And those may be the same, but just by way of example. So, so you may decide, and it may be true, that, well, in reality, the thing that this website really does is market to the OOUX curious and managers. And so if I take this out, let's say, and again, working hypothetically here for time, so markets to, and I'll zoom in here in a second. I don't, these tiny labels. So OOUX.com, we say markets to the OOUX curious and managers. And we could say it, you know, supports, hosts the experience for current OOUXers or something like that. Maybe that's on a different platform. Yeah. The idea here is like, you know, the website's probably not doing the same thing for everyone in your universe. And how do we start to pull that apart? Okay. So we have OOUX.com, RewiredUX.com. Let's go back over here a little bit. So Rewired is a design agency. Rewired reflects, and this is often where I'll sort of look at, well, really we care more about the brand than the website, probably, right? You care more about the agency and about the brand. So sometimes I'll flip it around. So should be a reflection of.
Do you ever do the arrows both ways? Do you ever like maybe actually do 2 arrows between to say?
Yeah. So this is probably not one of those moments where I would do it.
Okay.
Is reflected in and reflex. So this, you know, sometimes I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, this is more elegant, right? To just say this reflects this. But sometimes what I'm doing, again, on the rhetorical side, is like, this is a big idea. You know, we want to talk about like, you know, the rewired experience. We're trying to elevate our thinking here. And so really mean the rewired experience is explained on rewiredux.com, right? So maybe we're actually, you know, we've got this idea we've had, which is what we offer, what we sell, our philosophy is reflected on our website. But maybe we're going to make a more specific strategic or tactical choice, which is what we're going to do is walk people through our process on this website and capture leads, you know. And so sometimes getting those things is, what do you really want for an agency, I'm guessing here, but I know what I want, which is qualified content, client leads, people with money who need my services.
Yeah.
Um,
So just to pause here a moment, because I think that lots of people are probably thinking like, okay, how is this work with or is different than a system model, basically entity relationship diagram. And what I'm seeing here is like with an entity relationship diagram, or what we call a system model in the OUX world, a model of the system that might be encapsulated in the rewiredux.com or encapsulated in OUX.com. We're looking at our objects or our concepts are things that have multiple instances, like by definition, things that are instantiated. A lot of these things here are a single instance. So explaining that cardinality doesn't become important. Like that's why we want to have both arrows and have the arrows go both ways in our system model so that we can get really clear on cardinality, because it's really important in a database and then how it actually manifests in something like a website or an app. Here that it's more, each of these is a single instance or a larger concept, like an information website. We're not talking about like how do we produce all our information websites in our database.
Yeah, it's again, I mentioned this on the podcast. I talk a lot about isness, and the reason I do that, that's just it's a little bit of a goofy coinage, but the idea is that I have a talk I give about websites, and it's like, what even is a website? My experience as a consultant is that if you get 7 VPs or executive level folks around a table and ask them to talk about the website, they all have absolutely different mental models of the organizational website. And that is irrespective of modeling the whole system, all the content types, all the components, all the prompts, all the flows. Irrespective of all of that. Doesn't matter what it's made of, doesn't matter how it's produced. It could be one guy with HTML and Notepad publishing the website. What it means to them is different. And it's filling different needs for those different people. So, we need to have just as a company, and now I'm going out into generic land here, but we need a marketing platform. We need a news hub. We need a public notice board for our legal stuff, right? These are like 3 things that one website does for most organizations, right? We have to post this stuff legally. Our PR team wants to post news here. Maybe we have a fiduciary responsibility to publish something. The brand team is looking at it. Well, really what the website should be doing is this is the destination where we get people to fill their information in a box to generate qualified client leads. It's one website. That's 3 very different things, and not understand, like being able to see that level. And a lot of what I end up talking about, so much of user experience design, we talk about mental models. What is the user's mental model? How do we reflect their mental model? Well, in my experience, what we don't spend nearly enough time articulating is our own conceptual model. Sometimes we'll have a metaphor. This app works like a calendar. This app works like a messaging tool. That's how our chatbot works or whatever. But the conceptual model of our whole universe, of our whole isness, we don't dig into very much. So by way of example, I thought it was really interesting, Sophia, something you and I talked about a little bit. So these objects you have labeled also as content types. So in my universe, as a content strategist, event is a great one. So let's say there's like this thing that we're experiencing now is an event. We're all on this call. This is an event. There is also a thing that is a meetup event posting. Which is a content type. And you could decide, and you could even decide that there is a OOUX happy hour meetup event posting. And even though that's not modeled in any system, even though it's not in a content management system, this might have the same components, introduction, speaker bio, etc. And this is only one instance of this broader thing, which maybe this belongs over here and this belongs here under content types. And so to me, event potentially is not a useful concept in this ecosystem, because there's lots of different kinds of events. Maybe it is a useful concept because we could have events, and it's probably more specifically, let's say there's OOUX events. And what is the purpose? So just for fun here, we'll come in. You have OOUX, you have this philosophy. Why do we have these events?
Right. To get together, to network, right? So that people can start seeing other faces of other OOUXers, to learn and spread the OOUX love.
Yeah. Okay. So OOUX events provide networking, let's say enable maybe. So they enable networking. OOUX events, I mean, broadly, I would say, I think it's interesting since you do a lot of these and it's a big part of your system. What is the relationship to OOUX? I would say maybe the events themselves evangelize. Well, you're the chief evangelist. Let's say they amplify.
Yeah.
Right. So OOUX events amplify OOUX, gets people talking about it.
I like that.
Generates material, what have you. So, yeah. So, if I were to just, maybe I'll close out here and we can kind of shift to some questions. If I was going to start to shuffle the rest of these concepts in, what I tend to look for is, okay, we've got all this stuff, but how do I turn it into this? How do I turn it into this beautiful little diagram, right? What is our universe really? What are the couple of big things, So, I've gotten lost here. So we have, it feels like Orca, you don't have a website for it, and I think that's totally fine, or at least you didn't share one with me. We've got Orca. Orca feels like a big freaking idea.
It is. And it
let's
potentially is bigger than OOUX. This is something that I'm struggling with right now, actually.
And so I think, as I'm consulting with someone, depending on their goals, if their goal is messaging, if they're wanting to get their story more straight, oh boy, okay, can't click on it, then click L. There we go. I'll even make the line thicker. So OOUX employs Orca, makes use of, is... so that's interesting. I think maybe even more interesting is what is this relationship?
Yeah.
So Orca to OOUX,
and it enables.
Yeah. Orca enables practice, so the Orca, what did we say it was? Framework for understanding and synthesis enables the OOUX, which, it's a digital design philosophy. Yeah, it's so this is where it gets really interesting to me. Organizations, right? So companies, let's even make it simpler. So we're in a sales mindset. So companies adopt digital design philosophies. So, my quick, rapid outsider's impression is, you've sort of got two things. You want companies to adopt the digital design philosophy of OOUX because of all these wonderful benefits and outcomes and so on. The way that they do it is by learning Orca. So that's why we have the trainings and so on and so forth. So I need to teach you the philosophy. I also need to give you the hard skills of Orca. If you do those two things, you're going to have, profit and simplicity, and everyone's going to be happier and more excited. And then what you would take from there is, okay, now that we've got that little story, let's remap this out to our channels, our platforms, and so on. So you might decide that, just off the cuff for me, feels like the philosophy is a good place. Like that's a good thing to write on other people's blogs about, as a for instance, right? Like I want to evangelize the philosophy other places and get people excited about this philosophy that might be the answer for them. And then when they get closer to my core and they're on OOUX.com, maybe that's where I am saying, focusing a lot more on Orca and the tactics and that sort of thing. And that's just one way to shake it. So I'll pause there for a second.
The new Orca hub in Notion, which a lot of that is going to happen there. So like,
Yeah.
So I'll, definitely throw your questions in the chat and I'll kind of facilitate them. My question, something that I talked about, we talked about the podcast, and I just thought it was really interesting, and a big aha moment for me is like level of granularity. And I wonder if you have any hot tips on that, because I'm thinking like, I mean, even for going back to the event, like event is actually a type of resource. It's an instance of an event, of a resource type. So,
yeah.
And then there's the listing on meetup.com. And then there's also the listing on OOUX.com that links to meetup.com. And then the fact that a event on, an event on OOUX.com transforms it. We switch the type and it turns into an event recording. So this thing right now that is an event now is converted into a different resource type with an event recording. Like that feels like something that I might put into an object map. I might put it into a system model. Is that level of granularity, or does it depend? Like, do you pull some of those more granular concepts into a system model like that, or into an ecosystem map like this?
Yeah, you might. And that's generally the instinct that clients have when I'm working with them, because that's their day-to-day, is all of that stuff, all of those activities and so on. And so generally I'll listen and I'll record that to an extent and capture all of those nouns and all of those specifics. But what I would probably steer someone to in that specific example is to give a name to the big thing they're describing, which is now our event publishing workflow. Okay.
Scott, you're so good at this.
And so let's say, for instance,
do your job well.
I don't know who Lindsay is, but I'm going to volunteer her. So let's say that this person manages or owns or oversees our event publishing workflow. And then you could do really whatever if this technique works for you and makes you happy to do the workflow, great. If more of a system model or whatever it is, I do a lot of workflows in tables in Microsoft Word or Google Drive now, which is not sexy at all. But like a workflow should have step 1, step 2, step 3. Maybe there's optional substeps.
That's going to be in Notion. The workflow would sit in Notion, which would be and then the individual events would end up with a task with a standard operating procedure underneath it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you map this to, and then when it gets really interesting, so let's say, just by way of example, event type 1 and event type 2 and event type 3, this is where a lot of content strategy work falls down. It's like people don't take it far enough. It's why I have to come in and clean things up a little bit. Is they're like, oh, we have an event publishing workflow. And what the employees want to know is, well, does that apply to every event we ever do? Well, it doesn't, except in the cases where it doesn't. It's like, okay, great. Well, we really need to document that. What are the cases where the event publishing workflow is not what we use? So for event type 3, we do something else. So so now we actually are missing a concept. Maybe this is our internal event publishing workflow, and maybe we have a partner event publishing workflow.
Exactly. Like me speaking at a conference or a certified strategist speaking at a conference. How that's totally different than us publishing a happy hour.
Yeah. And where this, something I noticed on your initial map too, Sophia, which I do a lot for clients. So we've got people. Yes. You. Great. I think there is
Sophia.
Yeah. So there's kind of two things here, which is like, let's just say director. So there's sort of this role of being the director or the organizer or the coordinator. There's also this brand that is you. Your name, what people know about you, associations thereof. Yeah, which I can, it can it depends on your comfort level. And that doesn't mean you have to elevate it, but understanding that like, okay, really I want, you have this framing of like chief evangelist, and I think that is probably not one I would actually put into a concept. That's one I would maybe map as the relationship, right? So now we come down here, is the chief evangelist of OOUX, which is a design philosophy. Do design philosophies have evangelists? Yeah, sounds like they do. Yeah. Great, that all makes sense.
And the creator of the Orca process. And like differentiating that is something that I'm always like kind of struggling with. And how do I say like, I didn't like invent OOUX. I potentially coined it. I don't know, who knows, but like, I can't own OOUX, but I can own the ORCA process. That's like, use these color-coded sticky notes versus like, OOUX is just this big idea. Yeah.
You know, and if you were onboarding someone new who needed to do marketing for you, come on, arrows. Like this is so often undocumented in organizations, but is so incredibly important to share in this formal way, right? And so people are probably looking at this and thinking, well, isn't this like a message architecture? Isn't this voice and tone? Like, I use content ecosystem mapping. I talk about it a lot as a starter culture. So this is the little, it's this sourdough starter for... Absolutely could be, I think, for OOUX. I think it could be for a content model. It could be the jumping off point for a site map for your information architecture. But in and of itself, it's not any of those things. This is the sense-making activity that gets you ready to do good work on those. Everyone jumps to the deliverable producing decision-making framework before they understand each other. It's why all their shit sucks. It's why there's so much content chaos. It's why they need content strategists. So I am evangelizing for sense-making. That is the thing that I argue for a lot in organizations. So the right time to do this is now. And just with the people you're working with, whether it's this formal technique or not, the more disambiguation and sense-making of concepts you can do, so much the better.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott. And I think you already said that you don't have a hard stop. So if we can do a few questions, that would be great. It is right at the hour. So if you have another meeting, feel free to drop. We'll probably hang out here for another 5 or 10 minutes to do some questions. And you can always grab the recording. The recording will be sent out via the newsletter on Monday. But what you said, formal process, what I love about this so much is, and what I think everybody should take away with this is how much of a mess Scott is comfortable with making here. And that's part of the process. Like, be messy about it. Like, and like put things in there and be like, oh, that doesn't feel right. Let me delete that. Let me like copy that, move that over there for later. Like, this should feel really fun, right? It's fun. It's playful. It's okay to not kind of overthink like whether this should be a concept or a relationship. Just put them both on there and see what feels right. And then rejigger your arrows. And you might do that for, I don't know, a few days. But if you get clarity coming out of that, right? If one thing gets clear or then like, that is so worth it. It's one big thing. Like even just that granularity of saying like, I've got these two big things, OOUX and ORCA, and really everything kind of goes around it. Like that's the center, that's the juicy center of this. And there's a relationship between the two. Very, very cool. So, thanks so much, Scott. Can you share that file with me so I can?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Keep rolling with it. Okay. So we do have some questions here. Going back to Joey. Joey, if you're still there, if you want to just go off mute and ask your question. Managing bubbles.
Yeah. Hi. So for managing all the bubbles, so the way that you were doing it in this session was basically like dragging, like you had all these columns prepared of all the different concepts, and then kind of dragging them out and adding them to a map. As you drag them out, you kind of like lose that definition of what column they're tagged back to. So I was wondering is that like a shortcut that you're using just for this, or does those definitions become less important add them to a map, or like how do you manage that? Do you like make a copy of those columns? Yeah,
that's a really good question. What I typically do so losing the definition, that is important. I use those categories to help people generate the noun list and get all those ideas together. But what I want to do, and it's a reason I don't introduce color too early. Like I always apply things like color, labeling, emoji, annotations, whatever at the end to add information. But I want to make the definitions on the canvas itself. So I will pull them away so that, you think of this as a channel, but maybe we want to change that definition. So losing like the origin of it, I don't like to lose the origin. So very often what I'm doing is I make multiple versions of the map. It's like if I'm facilitating this live, usually like every 20 minutes, 10 minutes, I copy the whole thing, Some of my deliverables to clients, it's like time stamped. Like we were here on Monday morning at 9 a.m. We were here Monday afternoon. Tuesday morning, we tried this tack and we went here, 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 here to just show how it evolves and tell that story. So all that said, sometimes I'm a little sloppy and I don't mean to move things from where they are and I mean to copy and paste them. I think it's better to keep that record. Folks will start to get anxious and ask, like, do we need to use all the concepts? Should they all go in there? And, the more I can make other people comfortable with making a mess, to your point earlier, Sophia, like so much the better. So I play a little fast and loose with it.
I'm gonna try to just not color code too soon, but that's good. I'll really have to restrain myself, but I'll try your method. Joey, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, does everything go in there? Like in the ideal state, do you take everything from other columns? But no, okay.
Definitely not. If everything you noun forged goes in, that is I think the only time I've done that, and I talked about this example on the podcast, is just like if what you've switched into is like, this is too much of a mess to even map. We just want to make a visual inventory now so we can have every brand, every product, everything represented. Sometimes that's nice. And what you've made at that point is more of a, I don't know what these are called, but the thing where like you draw between the numbers, right? So you like all the little points are mapped out and you move your pen from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. And eventually you have
connect the dots.
Connect the dots. I don't know.
It's a little game where you get the squares.
Yeah, so like a connect the dots picture. So sometimes if you put everything down, that's a different way to approach this, is like lay it all out in space. Like here's like a little nebula of channels, here's a nebula of products, here's a nebula of systems and teams. And then talking to a particular stakeholder, you print it out or put it on the board, you get a Sharpie, and you do a connect the dots about one specific aspect of their universe. So that's about the only time that I would leave everything in, is if I wanted to do that connect the dots approach.
And this is the same with when we're doing this for trying to find our objects that would go into our system, like the noun foraging, like you might have 10 times as many, or even more than that. Like you might have dozens and dozens of nouns that come up and end up with 5 objects. Yeah. You have to and then you go through prioritization even more, and then you go to 4 objects. Like you're always trying to get to that least effective dose. Have you ever done any prioritization? Did you ever dot voting or something like that? Like here's all the noun foraging, here's all the concepts. Like what are the 10 most important concepts for our organization, and people kind of vote on them?
Yeah, absolutely. I did try that. I think I've done that twice. I've never done it digitally. I'm not sure. That would get a little even messier, but it worked really well in person when we had Post-it notes. And I guess this would be easy enough to represent if you did breakout rooms and multiple versions. But I sort of had okay, here's everything. I want everyone to go to the channels wall. And you get to grab at least 3 things and move them over to the starter list, so everyone go grab 3 things from our systems list, put it in this. And so then that just helps me focus and give me a smaller set of things to work from.
Yeah, that's good.
The other thing I wanted to add quickly about concepts, a really common question is, do we need to use everything? Can we only use what we came up with in noun foraging, or can we add more later? You have to add more later. The important concepts reveal themselves during this process. Yeah. If people could come up with the useful concepts at the beginning, then probably everyone is actually thinking very clearly, and you don't need to be doing this. But it's those missing concepts, that missing articulation of, marketing website, of event planning workflow, of brand. Those distinctions are the ones that are very often missing when you look at an org chart or when you look at a site map and that sort of thing.
Cool. Let me get to just a few more questions here. So Lisa had a question on collaborating. So who are some good people, if you're going to do this with your team, who are some good people to have in the room, and how many people is too many to kind of run a session like this?
Yeah.
Pass.
I've never done it with more than, I think, 10 people in the room. The more people there are, the more likely I am to fully drive and move everything myself and just do it as kind of a visual note-taking and reflecting and facilitation exercise. You can do the ideation part, the noun foraging and generation. You can do that with a pretty big group, and then you're going to start to winnow it down into smaller groups. good people to work with is basically anyone who has their own set of vocabulary that they're pulling from. So if that's like customer support is great. They have lots of words that they're using. The technical content people, the IT manager, whoever implements your CMS. I've done this on a big map for a large scale project. I'll have a core group of people, 6 or 8. We're the ones collectively building the final picture. But then whoever's available from that core group, we'll sort of go do like a stakeholder interview / micro mapping process. So we show them what we have already. We ask them, what's some of the stuff that's missing from your world that you would like to see represented in this picture we're making? And they add that, and we rough it in. We don't worry about getting it final, but we say, thank you so much for your input. That's really cool. And you can shop that around to as many people as you're able to, really.
That's super helpful.
Yeah, thank you for the answer.
Thanks for the question.
Okay, so from Chris here, this is kind of another one on fidelity, but just wondering if you have anything else. And Chris, I'm right there with you. Chris is struggling with zooming in too much, losing the proverbial forest. What practices help you come back to what matters? So I saw you do that so many times when I was like, you're so good at this. Like you went to like, oh, okay, we don't need to worry about all these event pieces. It's just this process. You kind of encapsulated it nicely. Hot tips on how to do that? Or is that just practice?
It may just be practice. I know that's not an encouraging answer, but it's something I got out of one of the first things some of the first formal education I ever had in this industry. I took a workshop from Donna Spencer, who's a great information architect and has written some books on that. I took one of her all-day workshops. And what I learned from her, and my big takeaway, was that the listening to what people are saying while you are doing the activity is actually the most important part of all of these various information architecture techniques, whether it's card sorting or tree testing or what have you. So listening to what people are saying, and then because speech honestly has a natural like focusing and summarizing quality. I can't talk that whole crazy picture we just made. Like in every detail of it. So I'm going to say something smaller and simpler and more real. And I try and listen to those words, listen for those concepts that people are sharing, and I drop those onto the canvas while people reflect on what we've done. So it's really the participants end up being like, you said I'm so good at this, Sophia, and it's what I'm good at is listening. You were the one doing the simplifying there. That was you focusing in, saying something that felt more true and closer to what was real. So that's everyone knows that, but they're not very often used to this work of making a picture of what they know. They're operating on intrinsic knowledge and intuition, and we want to make it explicit.
Yeah, it would be really cool, Scott. Like if there was like going back to the hot tips, like if there was a way to sort of like quickly test, like, is this the right level of fidelity? And it might be like, it depends, but like, for example, is this thing are you talking about bits of a process that we can just encapsulate it into a process? Or are you talking about like, I don't know, like any kind of, so something like that is be like a little like checklist to be like, okay, I've gone too broad, which I don't even know if you can go too broad. I mean, or am I going to, that level of fidelity, like hitting that, and it might be practice, but also like, rules of thumb around I know that I've gone too broad if this is true, or I know I've gone too detailed if this is true.
Yeah. One quick tactical thing I can share is very often it really helps people. The visualization of this is really useful. So I try not to just ask about things. I literally move them around. So if this was true, does this feel more or less accurate, right? So you move things. But similarly with concepts. So we've got like, in Sophia's map, we've got OOUX, we've got Rewired, we've got design philosophy, we've got all this stuff. I might take some other concept that to me, my intuition is that it's like too in the weeds, and I'll drag it next to these big ideas. And then I'll ask, does this feel like it's in the same orbit? Does this feel like as big of an idea as the rest of these? And very often, the person you're working with will know instinctively, oh no, that's, you know what, we can set that aside. That's not as important as the rest of this stuff. And again, coming back to the focus question too, is remembering like, what were our goals here today? What were we trying to unpack? So, for in this little example, I was trying to bring it back to like, how do we disambiguate what these websites are about? Well, to do that, we need to disambiguate what these two ideas are, the agency versus the philosophy versus the methodology. So anything that doesn't feel as related to that, I'm probably going to set aside.
Got it. Very cool. Okay. One last question. Mary, are you still here? Mary's not here anymore, but I'll ask anyway. Do you have any key guideline is the most important for a successful content ecosystem mapping session? Like, what makes it successful when you're in there? You've got the right people in the room. You've got the right number of people. You've got all your keyboard shortcuts ready to go. Like, what else can you help to like set yourself up for success?
I think I struggle with this because I get so excited about the technique and digging in and moving all the bubbles. And as I'm so comfortable working this way that I can forget that this feels extremely uncomfortable for some people. It is stressing them out. It's a new way of working and thinking. I'm asking them to tap dance on a frozen lake, and being conscious of that in how you let people know what's going to happen next, what we're going to, constantly checking in what we're going to do with it. If it's over multiple sessions, recapping what we did last time and who was in the room, how far we think we're going to get today, showing them that you're keeping versions of this, that this is all adding up to something. That can be really nice. And then if you're really working on it as like a consultant, the client, they're going to appreciate the sense making, but they're going to want to know, how the heck am I going to share the story of what we're doing back with the people that I'm working with, what the outcomes were intellectually. And so I found over time that starting that at the beginning, showing them, like, you could give them an outline of a deck that is going to help them present the learnings from this work. You could share that at the beginning so that we start filling it in collectively, in addition to doing this sense-making ecosystem mapping process. If it's more of an internal thing and you're just working with your team and it's a little startup and everyone's just making sense of it, you might not need all of that. But the big one is like, the more you are focused on understanding that this kind of work can make folks uncomfortable, engaging them in a way that is most comfortable for them. Some people just want to talk. They don't want to touch it. Some people are going to want a copy of this. I've had clients who are like, okay, between this session and the next, give me that, because this is awesome, and I want to go rip into it and work faster than you can talk and come back with something else. So finding that comfort level and how people want to work is a really important thing for collaboration.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Thank you so much, Scott. This was awesome. Thank you all for being here. I just dropped in the chat the podcast episode if you haven't gotten a chance to listen to that. It's been actually, Scott, one of our most popular episodes. So folks love it. It's a really cool conversation. So y'all have a great rest of your day. Go into a great weekend. Happy OUXing. And always reach out to me if you have any questions about OUX. And I'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.